You're listening to Midnight Whispers Stories. This channel is dedicated to true psychological horror. Calm, realistic stories built around isolation, silence, and places that feel normal until they don't. If you value long-form immersion, a consistent atmosphere, and stories that stay with you beyond a single listen, subscribe to Midnight Whispers Stories. Story 1. Vacancy Sign Was On. I want you to imagine something for me. It is 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. You re-driving down Route 49, somewhere between nowhere and nowhere else. The highway stretches ahead of you like a dark ribbon dissolving into static. Your phone has no signal. Your headlights are the only thing cutting through the black. You haven't seen another car for 47 miles. Then you see it. The motel appears without warning, rising from the desert floor like something that shouldn't exist in the waking world. The Starlight Motor Lodge. The sign flickers, not constantly, but in that disturbing way that suggests the electricity is dying, struggling against the void. And there, glowing in that sickly yellow-green, the word every exhausted driver wants to see. Vacancy. That is where my story starts. That is where mine ended, too. Though I didn't know it yet. I'd been driving for 18 hours straight. I was alone. I was scared, though I couldn't say why. The fear was something I felt before I understood it, the way animals sense storms coming. My name is David. I am an insurance adjuster from Phoenix. Ordinary. The kind of man nobody remembers. That detail matters because when you re-ordinary, you become invisible. And in places like the Starlight, invisible is what will get you killed. The parking lot was empty. Completely empty. Not 5 cars, not 1 car. Empty the way a grave is empty. Just cracked asphalt, weeds splitting the concrete, and that flickering vacancy sign casting everything in this horrible, sickly light that made everything look like a nightmare someone was half remembering. The office glowed ahead. Through the window, I could see a single light, bare bulb, probably 50 watts. There was no one inside. The door had one of those bells they still use in old places, the kind you ring at the desk. But there was no desk. There was just a room, about 15 feet by 15 feet, with a wall of keys behind where the desk should have been. I stood in that office for 5 full minutes before I realized something terrifying. The keys on the wall weren't sorted by room number. Each one hung on a hook, but they weren't organized. That is when I noticed the motel wasn't arranged like a normal motel. Through the office window, I could see the buildings didn't follow any pattern. They'd been around the property in a way that made my brain hurt trying to map it. Like Escher had designed a nightmare and someone had actually built it. I rang the bell. Nothing. No response. No one came. I stood there in that creepy, unsettling office, my heart starting to beat in a way that felt visible, tangible, like it might crack through my ribs. The fluorescent light hummed above me. That is when I noticed the dry erase board on the wall. No checkout after 7 a.m. was written in large letters. Below it, in different handwriting, someone had written, "Checkout is permanent." I told myself it was a joke, something funny the owners thought was cute, but my hands were trembling. I rang the bell again. That's when I heard the door open from the back. Slowly, the hinges were bad. It creaked the way doors creak in horror movies, and I felt something primitive in me react. Fear of the unknown, pure, primal fear. A man emerged. He was tall, or maybe the room made him seem tall. He wore a shirt that might have been white once. His face was the kind of face that doesn't leave impressions. I could walk past him on the street and never see him. But his eyes were too aware. They locked onto me like he was reading something written across my skin. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. I heard myself say I needed a room. My voice sounded far away, like it was coming from another person. He nodded slowly and moved his hand toward the wall of keys. His movements were deliberate, each gesture stretched out like he was moving through water. He selected a key. I didn't notice which one. He slid it across the counter with one finger, not handing it to me. Just sliding it toward me like the key itself might infect him if he held it too long. The key was real, metal, warm to the touch. I asked how much a night cost. He wrote something on a pad of paper. I looked at the number. It was impossibly cheap. $35. But when I looked up, his face had changed. Was he smiling? I couldn't tell. I paid him cash. He didn't offer a receipt. My room was number 7. The man had pointed to the left, through the office door, and then made a vague gesture that seemed to indicate everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I took the key and pushed out into the night. That is where things became truly horrifying. The parking lot had been empty when I arrived. Now there were cars, at least a dozen cars. All of them were old, 70s and 80s models. All of them were parked facing away from the office, toward the desert. The driver's side windows were rolled down. The doors were all open. I stood in the parking lot, breathing in air that tasted like sand and rust and something else. Something organic and wrong. The cars were empty, but they looked like something had recently left them. The seats were still warm. I could feel the heat radiating from the closest one. I was terrified, but I was also exhausted. My mind was operating at the level where fear and fatigue become indistinguishable. I told myself people had just parked in a strange way, told myself I was tired and seeing patterns that didn't exist. That's what the fear does. It lies to you. It tells you there as a reasonable explanation. I found room 7. It was at the end of a corridor I didn't remember walking down. The door was painted a shade of red that looked like old blood in the darkness. The number on it was hand-painted, the numbers uneven and fading. The key fit perfectly. The door opened without a sound. The room was clean, too clean, obsessively clean. There was a bed with a white comforter, pulled tight like a corpse wrapped in a shroud. There was a television set from the 80s, a dresser painted hospital beige, a door to a bathroom. Everything smelled like bleach and nothing else, like someone was trying to erase something. I wanted to leave immediately. Every instinct was screaming at me to get back in the car and drive. But the highways were black. I was too tired. My eyes were closing by themselves. And part of me, the part that survival instinct makes stupid, told me that maybe I was overreacting. I locked the door. There was a chain lock. I used it. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't investigate the bathroom. I took off my shoes, kept my jeans and shirt on, and lay on top of the comforter. That one precaution. I wouldn't let my skin touch their sheets. The room was silent in a way silence shouldn't be. There was no ambient noise. No distant traffic from the highway. No hum of electricity. Just nothing. Absence masquerading as peace. I closed my eyes. That is when I heard the noise. It came from inside the walls. Not in the wall itself, but inside it. Something was moving through the cavities between the drywall and the outer walls. Something large. I could hear it sliding, the way a snake slides, but the scale was all wrong. This was something big, something that had weight. I opened my eyes. The noise stopped immediately. The darkness in the room was absolute. Even with my eyes adjusted, even with the parking lot light filtering through the thin curtains, I couldn't see anything clearly. Just shapes, just suggestions of objects. I told myself it was rats, raccoons, some creepy crawly thing with a reasonable explanation. But the sound had been too deliberate, too purposeful. I must have slept because suddenly it was different darkness. The darkness of the very early morning. That crushing darkness before dawn when time seems to have stopped. My eyes opened. I didn't know why. Some animal sense had woken me. The chain lock was open. The door was closed, but the chain lock that I had definitely, absolutely set before sleeping. I remembered the sound of it clicking. Was now hanging loose. The chain had been cut. Clean cut. With something sharp. I got out of that bed like it was on fire. My heart was slamming. My hands shook as I grabbed my shoes. I didn't even put them on properly. I just held them and went for the door. I had the key in my hand already. I opened the door. The hallway was different. I am not being poetic. I am being literal. The hallway had a different number of doors. When I came in, I counted 5 doors total, including mine. Now there were 7 doors. 7 red doors, all identical. All numbered with that same hand-painted lettering. The numbers went 1, 3, 5, 7, 7, 9, 11. 2 doors were labeled 7. I was standing in front of one. 10 feet down the hallway was another. Identical in every way. Creepy. Unsettling. Like the architecture itself was gaslighting me. I walked toward the end of the hallway. I didn't check the office. I didn't look back. I just moved forward, my shoes in one hand, my motel key in the other, looking for the way out. The motel had changed. The corridors bent in ways that didn't match the layout I'd seen from outside. I took a left turn and ended up at a dead end. I backtracked and took another left. That hallway opened onto a courtyard I hadn't seen before. The courtyard had 6 doors arranged in a circle. All of them were red. All of them were labeled 7. The chilling, eerie feeling that had been nagging at the base of my skull became overwhelming. This wasn't normal. This couldn't be normal. Some part of my brain was screaming. I picked a hallway at random and ran. The motel unfolded around me like something alive. Corridors shifted. Doors appeared and disappeared. Once, I rounded a corner and found myself back at the office. The man was still there, standing behind the counter that hadn't been there before. He was looking at me with that too aware expression, and he was smiling. Not a friendly smile, a smile the way a spider smiles at a fly. I ran the other direction. The hallways twisted. I lost all sense of direction. The darkness was absolute. The only light came from scattered bare bulbs that cast more shadows than illumination. My breathing was ragged. My legs were burning. And that's when I realized the horrifying truth. The parking lot cars, the empty hotel, the desk clerk who was definitely, absolutely not human in any way that mattered. The impossible architecture, the way the motel seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. The chain lock that had been cut from the outside. Room 7 appeared again. My room. The door was open this time. The comforter on the bed had been pulled back. The impression of a body was still visible on the sheets. But the sheets were empty. That's when I understood. The cars in the parking lot weren't empty. They had been. When I arrived, they'd been empty. But something had filled them. Something had been waiting in the darkness outside my room. Something that moved through the walls like they weren't there. I finally found the office. I ran out of it without stopping to look at the desk. I had a nightmare image of the clerk following me, moving with that same slow, deliberate motion. That terrible smile widening impossibly wide. The parking lot was chaos. The cars were all running now. The engines idling in the darkness. The headlights off, but I could see the outline of them. These vehicles from decades past, all facing away from the office, all pointing toward the desert like compass needles drawn toward something magnetic. I got to my car. The doors were locked. I had the keys. I got inside. I started the engine and I drove. I didn't look back, but in my mirror, I watched the motel recede, and I watched something else. Figures, dozens of them, standing in the parking lot, watching my car disappear. Not moving, not chasing, just standing, watching, the way you watch a train pass by. I drove for 6 hours without stopping. I didn't pull over until I got to a truck stop in Williams, Arizona, where everything was bright and normal and filled with tired people and coffee and the sound of truck air brakes and civilization. That is where I should end this story. That is where I should tell you I was safe. I made it home. I told no one about the Starlight Motor Lodge because who would believe me? I've never talked about it until now, but there is a detail I left out. Something I need to tell you. On the third night after I left, I was back at my apartment in Phoenix. I was safe. I was home. I was lying in my own bed when I heard the noise. A sound in the walls. Inside the walls. Something large, moving through the cavities of my apartment building. Sliding. Searching. And this morning, when I woke up, my apartment door, locked, chained, dead-bolted, was open. The chain was cut, clean cut, with something sharp. I haven't slept since. I don't turn my back on the walls anymore. I don't go into rooms and close the door behind me. Every time I think I'm safe, I remember the man behind the desk. I remember that smile. I remember the cars all facing the same direction, waiting. And I remember this one other thing, that the vacancy sign at the Starlight Motor Lodge wasn't flickering because the electricity was dying. It was flickering because something was turning it on and off, methodically, deliberately, patiently, waiting for the next set of headlights to appear on the highway. The next tired driver, the next person who sees that disturbing, unsettling sign, the next person who chooses to check in. And I know this because I did something the next morning. I called the highway patrol. I told them about the motel. I described the location to them as best I could. The officer asked me detailed questions about its location. I answered them as accurately as I remembered. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Sir, there hasn't been any structure at those coordinates for 40 years. The old Starlight Motor Lodge burned down in 1983. They never found 7 of the guests. They just vanished. No bodies, no evidence. They found the manager's body in the office, though. He'd been dead for approximately 3 days when they found him." The line went silent. I asked when that was. "When did the fire happen?" He said, We're looking at the report now. According to this, it burned down on July 14th, 1983. I did the math. I was born in 1985. 2 years after that fire. But the motel felt new when I was there, recently maintained. The room was clean. The pavement was fresh. None of it had the feel of a condemned building. I asked him for the manager. His name. He told me. Richard Shelley, 34 years old, local man, owned the place for 5 years before the fire. I asked what he looked like. The officer said the records didn't include a photograph, just a name. But I knew what he looked like. I'd seen him behind the counter. That terrible smile spreading across his face. Those two aware eyes boring into me like he could read the truth written in my cells. And here is the part that keeps me awake at night. Here is the truly horrifying, the deeply unsettling realization. I went back to check the motel room paperwork in my bag. The receipt paper where he'd written the price. The writing was different than it had been in real time. When I looked at it just now, the handwriting changed. The number 35 was still there. But below it, someone had written 2 dates. Checked in, July 13th, 1983. Checked out, never. And below that, in a different hand, written so recently the ink was still wet, room reserved for David. Permanent stay commencing soon. I done. Do you know how they got my name? I never told them. But every night, I hear the scratching in my walls. Every morning, I check to make sure my locks are still locked. Every moment of every day, I feel like something is waiting for me to get tired enough, lonely enough, or scared enough to walk back through that door. The vacancy sign is on. It's always on. And I think it's been on for me for a very, very long time. That is the horrifying truth. That is what haunts me. That is what will probably kill me. Not a monster, not some obvious danger, but the creeping, chilling, nightmare realization that some places don't to let you leave. Some places invite you in through that flickering sign, and checkout ISN to your time of day. Checkout is permanent. Story 2. Last guest. I've never told anyone this. Not my wife, not my therapist, not the police, even though they asked. But tonight, sitting alone in this apartment with the lights on, I can't keep it locked inside anymore. What happened to me in that motel ISN is something you forget. It's not something you survive and move past. You just learn to live with the knowing. The scariest thing about horror ISN is always what you see. It's what you don't. It's the waiting. It's the moment right before something terrifying becomes real. When your brain is screaming that something is wrong, but you can't prove it yet. That was my life for 72 hours in October. And I'm still not sure I made it out. I was driving Route 49 through rural Kentucky, heading home to my family after a conference in Nashville. Nothing exciting about the drive. Just me, a half-empty coffee cup, and country radio stations that kept fading to static the farther I got from civilization. It was around 11 at night when I realized I was exhausted. The kind of tired where your eyes start playing tricks on you. Black mailboxes look like animals crossing the road. Distant lights blur and shift. I needed sleep badly. The motel appeared like something from a nightmare I'd already forgotten. Crimson neon letters spelling Shady Pines flickered against the darkness. The parking lot was empty except for a single pickup truck parked near the office. I remember thinking that was good. Fewer people meant the place might actually be quiet. The building itself was the kind of relic you find in forgotten corners of America, painted a sickly mustard yellow with black trim that had begun to peel. The windows were dark, no light from inside the office, no light from any of the rooms I could see, but there was a light in the window above the office, just a pale glow behind a thin curtain. Someone was there. I parked near the entrance and grabbed my wallet from the glove compartment. The parking lot smelled like wet pavement and something else I couldn't identify. Something like rust mixed with old pennies. My shoes crunched on gravel as I approached the office door. The chilling temperature of the night bit through my jacket. October in rural Kentucky ISN, too cold enough for a serious frost, but this felt different. This felt like the kind of cold that comes before something bad happens. The office door wasn't locked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was small, cramped, with a wooden counter dividing the space in half. Fluorescent lights hummed above, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. There was a bell on the counter, the kind you see in old hotels, with a small domed brass top. Behind the counter were cubbyholes for keys, maybe for 30 rooms. Most were empty, but what caught my attention wasn't the bell or the empty cubbyholes. It was the key sitting on the counter, room 217, just sitting there, waiting. No clerk, no bell ring, nothing. The key was just there, like someone had left it for me. I called out, "Hello, anyone here?" My voice sounded strange in that quiet space, too loud and too small at the same time. I waited. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song. The sound seemed to vibrate through my bones. Nothing happened. No one came. No sound from the back room or from upstairs. I should have left. Looking back now, with all the clarity that comes from surviving something terrifying, I should have gotten back in my car and driven another hour to a different motel, one with lights on and actual people. But I was so tired. My eyes were burning. My neck hurt from hours of tension on the road. The key was sitting right there, room 217. And the motel was clearly open, even if no one was at the desk. I took the key. The plastic tag was warm in my hand, which seemed impossible. The office was cold, almost refrigerated, but the key felt like it had been held by someone seconds before I picked it up. I told myself it was my imagination. Exhaustion does terrible things to your mind. It makes you paranoid. It makes you see patterns that aren't there. Walking back to my car, I could feel something watching me from that lit window above the office. I didn't look up. I don't know why. I just knew that looking would be a mistake. So I kept my eyes forward, found room 217 at the far end of the motel, as east wing, and parked directly in front of it. The room was exactly what you'd expect. 2 double beds with faded floral comforters. A television set from the 90s bolted to the wall. A bathroom so small you could almost touch both walls at once. The air smelled like bleach and something underneath it, something organic and faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in water. I locked the door, put the chain on, and checked the windows. Heavy curtains blocked the view outside. I didn't open them. Somehow I knew I didn't. To want to see what was out there in the darkness of the parking lot. I took a shower and tried not to think about the key appearing like that. Just waiting on the counter. No explanation. No one to ask. The water pressure was weak and the soap smelled medicinal. I kept the bathroom door unlocked. I'm not sure why. Some part of me needed to hear if something moved in the main room. In bed, under the scratchy blankets, I turned off the light and tried to sleep. That's when I heard the knocking. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate. Slow, steady taps on the wall between my room and room 216. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps again. A rhythm, a pattern, a message. I sat up in the darkness. My heart had started moving fast. The knocking came again, same pattern. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. It wasn't coming from the wall now. It was coming from the other bed, the one I wasn't sleeping in. The sound of knuckles on the metal bed frame, as if someone was lying there in the darkness next to me, tapping out their presence. I turned on the bedside lamp. Nothing. The other bed was empty, undisturbed. The room was exactly as it had been, but I could still feel it. Something in the air that hadn't been there before. A pressure, an attention. Something was aware of me. I told myself it was the motel settling. Old buildings make noise. The wind pushing against weak walls. Pipes expanding and contracting. All the rational explanations that mean nothing when you alone at midnight in a disturbing place hundreds of miles from anyone you know. The knocking started again. This time from the bathroom. Same pattern. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. It was moving. Whatever was making that sound was moving around my room. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark with my phone, this flashlight on, listening to the creaking of the building settle around me. The knocking came and went. Every time I thought it had stopped, it would start again from a different location. The closet, the window, the door. Each time I checked, there was nothing. Nothing moved. Nothing was there, but I could feel the wrongness pressing in. The eerie sensation that I wasn't alone, even though every single thing I could see contradicted that. When dawn came, I was nearly paralyzed with exhaustion and fear. The light through the curtain seams was like salvation. I packed my things in minutes and headed to the office, desperate to pay and leave. The office was empty again. The same clerk who had never been there. But there was a notebook on the counter with guest names written in shaky handwriting. I shouldn't have looked. I really shouldn't have. But I did. The names went back months. Some entries were normal. Others seemed repeated. The same names appearing again and again, sometimes with dates only a few days apart. And then I saw mine. Entered in today, is date in that same shaky handwriting, except under the checkout time it said, does not leave. My hands went numb. I looked at the key still on the counter. Another key, another room number, 218. The room next to the one I just slept in. The one that had made the knocking sounds. I left the motel without paying. I was already in my car and on the highway before I realized I was driving like a haunted person, checking my mirrors every 5 seconds, convinced I see something following me. Something from that disturbing place that had decided to keep me after all. The terrifying truth is I still don't know what happened in that motel. Was it just a place where lonely people heard things? A building so old and decayed that its very structure became a source of unexplainable noise? Or was it something worse? Something that understood me the moment I touched that warm key. Something that knew exactly how to make me afraid. I tried to research Shady Pines. I looked online, checked old maps, contacted the highway department. There's no record of it anymore. No address that matches. No building where it should have been. The portion of Route 49 where I stopped doesn't have any motels within 15 miles. The only thing that remains is my memory and the horrifying certainty that it was all real. Sometimes I think about the notebook, the names that repeated, the checkout time that said, "does not leave." I think about the clerk who was never there. I think about the key waiting on the counter, already warm, like it had been held by the person before me. The one before that. I think about room 216, where the knocking came from, and room 218, where another guest was supposed to stay. I think about whether someone checked into that room while I was there. I think about whether they heard the knocking too, whether they made it out. The scariest part is this: I've been driving that highway again. Same route, different times of day and night. I am looking for it. I don't know why anymore. Maybe to prove it was real. Maybe to find out what I left behind in room 217. And sometimes, on the darkest stretches of the road, in the parts of Kentucky that feel forgotten by the world, I catch a glimpse of mustard yellow paint in black trim. A neon sign flickering in the distance. The light in that window above the office. I press down on the accelerator and drive past, telling myself I imagined it. But I never quite believe myself. The knowledge sits with me always. The knowing that there are places in America where the ordinary rules don't apply. Places where a key waits on a counter for someone who never asked for it. Where knocking sounds come from empty rooms. Where the checkout sheet has terrible predictions written in its margins. And the most horrifying thought of all is this: I still have nightmares about that key in my hand. Nightmares where I put it in my pocket and kept driving. Nightmares where I never left the motel at all. Some nights, I wake up reaching for my wallet, wondering if I'm about to check in somewhere. Wondering if maybe I never actually left. Wondering if right now, in this moment, I'm actually lying in room 217, asleep, and everything after has just been my mind creating a comforting dream about escape. The nightmare isn't to the motel anymore. The nightmare is not knowing which side of the dream you're actually on. And that thought keeps me awake every single night. If these stories are holding your attention, that's intentional. Midnight Whispers Stories is built for listeners who want uninterrupted psychological horror, released consistently, without changing tone or style. Subscribing gives you a place to return whenever you want this atmosphere again. Story 3. Hallway Lights. Have you ever felt like you were being watched in your own home? Like something was there that shouldn't be? That's where my story begins, and I need to warn you right now, because what happened to me doesn't have a simple explanation. There's no comfortable ending. There's only what I experienced, and the terrifying questions I still can answer. My name is David, and 2 years ago, I took a job managing a motel on the edge of nowhere. I'm not going to tell you exactly where. Some places are better forgotten, and the moment I start naming locations, people will search for explanations. They'll find logical reasons. They'll rationalize, and maybe that is what I've been trying to do ever since that first night. But logic doesn't work when you staring at something that can exist. The motel was called the Riverside Motor Lodge, though there was no river anywhere nearby. It sat on a stretch of highway between a dying industrial town and 50 miles of empty desert. The kind of place you pass without thinking. The kind of place nobody remembers. Management had been bleeding money for years, and they offered me the job with a desperation that I should have noticed. They should have warned me. The building itself was nothing special. 2 stories, maybe 30 rooms, built sometime in the 1970s when everything was orange and brown and smelled like stale cigarettes. The office was small, and there was a narrow hallway connecting it to the residential wing. That hallway would become the center of everything that happened. That hallway would become my nightmare. I arrived on a Tuesday in late November. The previous manager had left almost a month before, which seemed odd to me then. Now I understand he probably ran The owner walked me through the building like a man eager to be rid of a burden. He showed me the office, the supply closet, the small apartment where I'd be living. Then he pointed down that long hallway. "The rooms are that way," he said. Nothing else. He didn't mention maintenance issues or difficult guests or anything that would actually matter. He just wanted to hand over the keys and disappear. That first night was quiet. Normal. Too normal, looking back. The hallway was well lit with fluorescent panels that hummed steadily. I walked through it after my shift, checking things as any responsible manager would. Everything seemed fine. I went to my apartment and tried to sleep. I didn't sleep well. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something that jolted me awake. It was a sound like footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving from one end to the other. I checked my phone, told myself it was just a guest, and tried to go back to bed. But there was something wrong about those footsteps. They never stopped. They never paused at a door. They just kept moving back and forth, back and forth. By dawn, I convinced myself it was nothing. Pipes, the building settling, the lies we tell ourselves when fear starts crawling up our spine. The second day passed without incident, but that night, the footsteps came again. And this time, I did something I shouldn't have done. I got out of bed and walked into that hallway to see what was there. Every light was on, every single fluorescent panel blazing against the darkness outside. The hallway was empty, completely, impossibly empty. But those footsteps were still echoing in my ears, still vibrating in my chest. I stood there, surrounded by that harsh white light, and I felt a creeping sense of wrongness settle over me. The air was cold, too cold for November in that part of the country. My breath came out in small clouds. I waited in that hallway for 15 minutes. Do you know why? I was waiting for something, waiting for the footsteps to come back, waiting for a door to open, waiting for an explanation. Nothing came. Eventually, I returned to my apartment and lay awake until sunrise. The next morning, I checked the guest log. We had occupants in rooms 2, 7, and 18. I made a note to check on them, to see if anyone had complained about the noise. But when I knocked on their doors, something strange happened. The guests seemed almost surprised that I was there. One woman said she'd been asleep all night. One man said he hadn't heard anything. The third room showed no signs of occupancy, despite the log saying it was booked. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was a new manager in an unfamiliar place. Of course I was going to be jumpy. But then the hallway lights started behaving differently. It began subtly. I did turn off the lights in the hallway before bed, a standard nightly routine. The motion sensor should have kept them dark when nobody was moving around. But when I walked through the next morning, they'd all be back on. Every panel blazing. I switched the control to manual, turning them on and off myself. Same thing. They'd be off when I left, on when I returned. By the end of the first week, I was documenting it, writing down times, dates, observations. I know how this sounds, but I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I needed something concrete to hold on to while the scariest part of my brain whispered that the motel itself was aware of me, that it was watching. The terrifying reality is that I had no explanation for what I was experiencing. Not in any logical sense. There was no faulty wiring, no timer system, no technical explanation that made sense. The electrician I called couldn't find anything wrong. The lights simply didn't obey the laws of electricity. They did what something wanted them to do. It was around the 10th day that I heard the footsteps again, but this time they were different. This time they stopped. They stopped directly outside my apartment door. I was lying in bed, every nerve in my body screaming at me not to move. The footsteps stayed there for what felt like hours. Just standing, waiting, breathing. I could feel it breathing, even though there was a locked door between us. Eventually, the footsteps moved on, but not back down the hallway the way they'd come. They went sideways, into the walls themselves, or so it seemed. The sound just faded, like whatever was making them had decided to become less real. I didn't get up to check that night. The following week brought a new development, and this was when I knew that something genuinely horrifying was happening at the Riverside Motor Lot. A guest approached me at the front desk around midnight. He was a trucker, middle-aged, the kind of guy who'd seen enough of life to stay calm about most things. But he wasn't too calm. He said he'd been trying to sleep, but he kept hearing footsteps in the hallway outside his room. Over and over, the same pattern, the same heavy pace. He looked through the peephole repeatedly. Every time, the hallway was empty. Every time, the lights were on. but there were no footsteps visible. Just the sound of them, moving back and forth, back and forth. "Is someone messing with me?" he asked. There was fear in his voice. Real fear. I told him I'd look into it. He left the next morning and never came back. By the end of the second week, the pattern became clearer, and so did my understanding of how deeply wrong things had become. I started keeping a recording device running in the hallway. I needed proof. I needed something I could listen to in daylight, something that would confirm what I was hearing at night wasn't to my imagination. The recordings were worse than I expected. They captured hours of complete silence. No footsteps, no sounds at all, nothing but the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional creaks of an old building. But I was hearing something, every single night. Clear, distinct, unmistakable footsteps. The recordings couldn't detect them. Whatever was making that noise existed in a space my recording equipment couldn't reach. That was when the thought hit me that made the experience truly terrifying. What if the footsteps weren't coming from the hallway? What if they were coming from somewhere else? What if I was hearing them because something wanted me to hear them? What if those sounds were a message, and I was the only one meant to receive it? I started researching. In the office, during slow nights, I searched the internet for any history of the motel. The Riverside Motor Lodge had changed hands at least 8 times in the past 30 years. Previous managers seemed to have left without much notice or explanation. I found one news article from 1992 about a guest who was found dead in his room. Heart attack, the article said. He'd been alone. The article seemed oddly brief, with very few details. No names of the managers back then. No real follow-up. It was like someone had actively worked to keep the story quiet. I felt the ground shifting beneath me. The fear was becoming less about the unknown and more about what I was starting to understand. This wasn't new. This wasn't unique to my time here. This was an ongoing thing. A presence, a routine, a hunger that cycled through managers and guests in seasons like the turning of years. The hallway lights stayed on throughout all of this. Every door along that corridor remained closed. Every room behind those doors sat silent during the day, but at night, they seemed to vibrate with a kind of waiting. The silence in those rooms was the loudest thing I'd ever experienced. It was the silence of something anticipating, something patient, something that had all the time in the world. Around day 18, I made the mistake of trying to confront whatever was happening. I sat up in the hallway at night with all the lights on. I sat in a chair outside my apartment and waited. I brought a flashlight, even though the lights were already on. I told myself I was being brave. In reality, I was being foolish. I was trespassing on something, his territory, and I had no idea what the consequences might be. Around 2 in the morning, the first light went out. Then another, and another, not suddenly, but deliberately, methodically, one panel at a time, moving down the hallway toward me. The darkness spread like spilled oil, like something alive was consuming the light. I ran. I'll admit it without shame. I ran back to my apartment, locked the door, and didn't come out until morning. When I checked, all the lights were back on. All of them. As if nothing had happened. But something had changed. I could feel it. Whatever presence lived in that hallway knew that I acknowledged it. That I stopped pretending. And now it was paying attention to me in a way it hadn't before. The footsteps became more frequent. They came earlier in the evening. Sometimes I could hear them when I was still awake, still moving around my apartment. I'd stop whatever I was doing and listen. The footsteps would also stop. We'd wait for each other in that terrible silence. Then gradually, they'd resume, moving past my door with what felt like deliberate, contemptuous disregard. I considered leaving. Every logical part of my brain screamed at me to pack a bag and drive away from that place. But there was something keeping me there. The need to understand, the need to document, the creeping sense that if I left, the next person to come here would be completely unprepared. They'd think they were going crazy. They'd have no explanation for the unsettling feeling that would grow stronger each night. They'd be alone with it. I was the only one who knew. I was the only one with evidence, however small. It was on the 23rd night that I experienced the most terrifying moment of the entire ordeal. I was asleep, deeply asleep, deeper than I managed to be in weeks. And then I woke up, suddenly, with the absolute certainty that something was standing beside my bed. The room was dark, completely dark. All the lights had gone out. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. But I could feel it. Presence, weight, intention. Something was standing right there, close enough that I could sense the displacement of air around it. I wanted to scream. but my body wouldn't to cooperate. I wanted to move, to reach for the bedside lamp, to do anything. But I was paralyzed. And then I heard it, not footsteps this time, breathing, slow, deep, patient breathing. Something was standing beside my bed in the darkness, and it was breathing. Not like a person breathes, like something much older, much larger, much more patient than any human. I don't know how long that lasted. It felt like forever. Eventually, the lights came back on. The fluorescent glow from the hallway began seeping under the door, and the moment light touched that room, the presence was gone. I was alone, but I was gasping, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break my ribs. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When dawn came, I made a decision. I was leaving. That day, I couldn't explain it to the owner. I couldn't leave a written note with any truth in it. He'd think I was insane. So I just locked up the office, left the keys on the desk, and drove away. I drove for 8 hours straight. I didn't stop. I didn't think. I just needed to be away from that place. But here is the thing about what happened at the Riverside Motor Lodge. Here is why I'm telling you this now. The fear didn't end when I left. The unsettling feeling didn't fade with distance. If anything, it's gotten worse. Because 2 weeks after I left, I started hearing those footsteps again. Not in a hallway, in my own apartment. Heavy, deliberate footsteps in the middle of the night, moving through rooms, passing my bedroom door. And when I checked the next morning, every light in my home was on. Every single one. They've moved twice since then. The footsteps followed me both times. The lights come on when they shouldn't. The breathing in the darkness has returned. And I am starting to understand something truly horrifying. I don't think whatever was in that hallway was tied to the building. I think it was tied to me. I think the moment I acknowledged it, the moment I sat in that hallway and waited for it to acknowledge me back, something transferred. I was the new manager. It had been waiting for someone to really see it, to really pay attention. And now it won. They let me go. The terrifying truth is that I don't know how to make it stop. I don't know if the footsteps will ever truly cease. I don't know if there is anything I can do to sever this haunting connection. Every night, I lie in bed and wait for the breathing to start. Every morning, I wake to find lights I didn't turn on burning in empty rooms. And sometimes, late at night, when the footsteps are moving through the hallway in my home, when the darkness is pressing against my locked bedroom door, I wonder about the next person who might take a job at a place they should never have gone. I wonder if someone else is sitting in an office right now, reading that job posting online, thinking about how it might just be the opportunity they need. And I want to scream at them. I want to warn them about hallways where no footsteps make sense. I want to tell them about lights that go dark. I want to tell them that some places aren't, they're just buildings. Some places are alive in a way we don't have words for. Some places are hungry. Some places are waiting. The scariest part of my story isn't what I heard or what I felt or what I experienced in that motel. The scariest part is that I know with absolute certainty that what happened to me isn't unique. There are other places like the Riverside Motor Lodge scattered across this country. There are other hallways with lights that turn off. There are other people who have heard those footsteps and felt that presence and tried to rationalize it away. And there are people right now, tonight, lying in beds in strange rooms, listening to sounds they can't explain. They feeling fear creeping up their spine. They wondering if they losing their minds. And they have no idea that what they experiencing is real. That it is actually there. That something is in that darkness with them. The footsteps have started again. It is 2 a.m. The hallway outside my room is lit up like a landing strip. And I can hear it now. That slow, deliberate pace, moving back and forth, back and forth. Every door in my apartment is closed. The silence is everywhere. And the silence followed me to my room. Just like it will follow whoever reads this story tonight. Just like it will follow whoever is listening to these words in the dark. Just like it is always following. Just like it never stops. The breathing is getting louder now. The footsteps are slowing. And in a moment, I'm going to turn off this recording. I'm going to sit in the dark and wait. Because I learned that the only way to make the fear go away is to accept it. To stop running. To stop fighting. To let whatever is here finally be acknowledged. I'll be waiting in the hallway lights that to go dark. Right there where all of this began. And maybe someday, someone will find this story and understand what it really means. Maybe someone will realize that the scariest horror ISN to what jumps out at you in the night. It's what never leaves. It's what follows. It's what whispers your name in the darkness when you trying to sleep. It's the hallway lights with no footsteps. The silence that speaks. The presence that never goes away. And now, neither will I. Story 4. Room that felt preoccupied. What if I told you that some places remember the people who died in them? Not remember in any comforting way, but remember like a scar remembers the blade. I learned this the hard way, and I'm still not sure I survived it. My name is Michael, and I need to confess what happened to me at the Riverside Motel on Highway 40, somewhere between Nevada and Utah. I need to tell someone because nobody will ever believe me. And that is exactly the point. If you re-listening to this, you were probably skeptical. Good. That is how I felt too, right up until the moment reality bent in on itself like a piece of tin foil crushed in an invisible fist. It started with a simple choice. A bad choice, the kind millions of people make every day without consequence. But I wasn't so lucky. I was driving alone from Colorado to California. Solo cross-country trip. The kind of thing a man in his late 40s does when he needs to disappear into the highway and find something he lost somewhere between his 20th and his 50th year. I'd been on the road for 14 hours. My eyes were burning. My back ached. The coffee wasn't working anymore. That is when I saw the motel sign glowing red in the gathering dark, right as the sun was bleeding into the horizon like a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. The Riverside Motel. A terrifying name in hindsight. Terrifying because there was no river anywhere near it. Just desert. Flat, empty, indifferent desert stretching in every direction like the surface of a dead planet. But I didn't think about that then. I only thought about sleep. The office smelled like cigarettes from the 1980s and something else. Something organic and faintly sweet, like flowers left too long in a vase of stagnant water. The clerk was a woman in her 70s, maybe older. Her eyes didn't quite focus on me when I handed over my credit card. She had the look of someone who had learned long ago not to ask questions about her guests. Her hands shook as she slid the old metal key across the Formica counter. Room 204, second floor, building B. I remember thinking how the key felt too heavy in my palm. Real keys don't feel like that anymore. Everything is electronic, keyless, digital. But this was the old kind. Solid, weighty, like it was carrying more than just the ability to open a door. The stairs groaned under my feet. The hallway was bathed in yellow light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. A chilling fluorescent hum made my teeth ache. The carpet was the color of dried blood, or maybe I only thought that because of what came later. Memory is a liar. It rewrites itself to match the ending. Room 204 was at the far end of the hall. The door opened smoothly, too smoothly. No resistance, no creaking, just this eerie silence as the darkness of the room revealed itself to me like a mouth opening. I stepped inside and turned on the light. The room was immaculate, and that was when the first unsettling feeling crawled up my spine like something with too many legs. The bed was made with military precision. The white sheets pulled tight enough to bounce a coin on them. The pillows were arranged perfectly. The kind of bed that had been made and left undisturbed for a very long time. Not sloppy, not lived in, just waiting. The bathroom was equally clean. Too clean. The shower curtain was drawn, and the tiles gleamed like they'd been scrubbed recently. Very recently, but there was no water in the sink. No droplets, no condensation. It was the kind of clean you see in model homes that no one will ever live in. I stood in the middle of the room, and something about the air felt wrong. Creepy, like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. The air felt thick, the way it does before a thunderstorm, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky outside my window. The room had a smell I couldn't identify. Not bad exactly, but not right. Something beneath the standard motel smell of industrial cleaner and bleach. Something that suggested the cleaning was recent and urgent. The unsettling feeling grew stronger. I told myself I was being paranoid. Exhaustion does that. After 14 hours of driving, your mind starts to play tricks. You start to see things that aren't there. You start to feel things that don't exist. Your imagination becomes your enemy. But then I noticed the hair. One single black hair, not mine, lying perfectly straight on the pillow. I picked it up. It was long, longer than mine, and it was fresh. Not old, not dusty, fresh. like it had been placed there minutes before I arrived. My heart started beating faster. I checked the closet, empty except for wire hangers that clinked together when I moved them. I opened the dresser drawers. They were lined with fresh paper, but they had never been used. No stains, no forgotten socks, no trace of human habitation. The bed was made. The bathroom was clean. Something about the air suggested I wasn't the first person to stay here. Something about the air suggested I wasn't supposed to be here at all. The terrifying realization crept in slowly. This wasn't the room waiting for guests. This was a room being prepared for something specific. This was a room that had been occupied moments ago and then abandoned in perfect condition, waiting for the next person to walk through that door. Waiting for me. I should have left. Any rational person would have walked out and driven through the night until they found another place to sleep. But I was tired, bone tired, the kind of tired that makes you stupid and slow. The kind of tired that makes you willing to accept minor unsettling feelings in exchange for an actual bed. I locked the door, put the chain on, checked it twice. I told myself it was fine. It was just a motel room. Thousands of motel rooms in America look like this. Impersonal, prepared for strangers. Nothing haunted about it. Nothing wrong. I was just tired and paranoid and reading into nothing. I showered. The water was hot, almost painfully so. I stood under it for a long time, letting it wash away the highway and the sweat and the unsettling feeling. It helped a little. For a while, I dressed in the t-shirt and sweatpants I packed for sleeping. I climbed into the perfectly made bed. The sheets were stiff, like they'd been starched. The pillow was too firm, the mattress too hard. It felt like sleeping on a stage, on a bed that was waiting to be observed. I tried to sleep. The darkness was complete. The windows had thick curtains that blocked out every molecule of light from outside. The silence was the kind of silence you only get in motels. That dead, muffled silence where sound doesn't seem to travel properly. Everything felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater. That's when I heard the first sound. It came from the room next to mine. A scratching sound, subtle, like fingernails on drywall, but quiet enough that I might have imagined it. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. Just silence again. Just that thick, horrible silence that seemed to push against my ears. I tried to sleep again, but sleep wouldn't come. Not because of fear exactly, though that was starting to creep in. Sleep wouldn't come because of the awareness. That terrible awareness that someone, or something, was awake somewhere in this building. That the room next to mine wasn't empty. That something in that room was conscious and aware and possibly aware of me. The scratching came again, longer this time, more deliberate, like something was marking off days on a calendar or wall, scratching and scratching and scratching. Then it stopped. I lay in the darkness for what felt like hours. Minutes felt like hours. The human mind has no sense of time in the dark. Time becomes elastic and wrong. Minutes stretch and compress. Hours feel like days. Then I heard something that made my blood cold. Breathing from the other side of the wall. Heavy breathing. The sound of someone awake and alert and listening to the night just like I was. The breathing was deep and rhythmic and completely, thoroughly wrong. It wasn't the breathing of someone sleeping. It was the breathing of someone waiting. I should have called the front desk. I should have run from the room. But I was frozen in a way that had nothing to do with physical paralysis. I was frozen by the creeping understanding that something wasn't right. Something wasn't right in a way that went beyond bad luck or a scary movie or normal horror. This was something deeper, something that suggested the universe had a problem with me specifically. The breathing stopped, silence flooded back in, but it wasn't the absence of sound. It was the presence of listening. The room itself seemed to be listening. I got out of bed. I walked to the wall, separating my room from the one next to mine. I placed my hand against it. The wall was cold. Wrong. The temperature had nothing to do with air conditioning. It was the kind of cold that came from something that shouldn't be warm. The kind of cold that made me think of tombs and graves and places where bodies are kept. That's when I heard the voice. Not through the wall, not from outside, but inside my head. No, not inside my head, in the room. A voice that didn't quite have sound, but had the shape of sound. The impression of a voice, like someone speaking through a medium that wasn't air. You were in my room, it said. And the terrifying thing wasn't the words. The terrifying thing was the recognition. The voice sounded exactly like mine. The exact same cadence, the exact same accent, the exact same tonality. I ran. I grabbed my keys and my wallet and my phone. I didn't even take my shoes. I ran out of that room and down the hallway, and that when I noticed something that stopped me dead in my tracks. Every single door on the second floor was labeled 204. Room 204, room 204, room 204, over and over in the hallway. The numbers on each door were identical, black on white, all of them saying the same thing, all of them claiming to be the exact same room. I stood there in the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I thought my ribs would break. The fluorescent light buzzed and hummed. The red carpet seemed to pulse like a living thing. And I understood something that froze the blood in my veins. I wasn't in a motel. I was inside something else. Something that was pretending to be a motel. Something that had learned how to mimic the form of a building but didn't understand the concept of different rooms. Didn't understand that each room needed to be separate, different, individual. The stairs appeared where they should have appeared. I don't remember reaching them, but I was suddenly at the bottom, running across the lobby. The clerk was gone. The office was empty. The front door opened when I pushed on it, releasing me into the desert night. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs screamed and I thought I would die of fear before the desert had a chance to kill me. I ran until my phone had signal, and I called a taxi from the nearest town, and I sat in that taxi shaking until the sun came up. I never got the rest of my things. Later, I tried to call the motel. There was no record of a riverside motel on Highway 40. The number on my credit card receipt didn't work. The charge showed up on my bill from a place called the Riverside Motel, but when I tried to look it up, there was nothing. No address, no phone number, no reviews online, no history of it ever existing. But the charge is still there, on my credit card statement from that night. Proof that I was there. Proof that something happened. I spent the last 6 months trying to understand what that place was. I tried to rationalize it. I tried to convince myself that I was having some kind of psychological break. That the exhaustion and the stress and the vulnerability of being alone had created a kind of waking dream. A nightmare that felt real but wasn't. But I know what I experienced. I know what that room was trying to do. That place wasn't haunted by ghosts. It was infested with something far more horrifying. Something that mimics human beings. Something that learns who you are by letting you stay in a room with your own impression still warm on the sheets. Something that uses motel rooms as traps. Perfect replicas of themselves created by this disturbing presence. The most chilling part? I realized something while writing this. Something that makes my hands shake as I type. Every motel room in America looks the same. Exactly the same. The same layout. The same color scheme. The same atmosphere. We never think about it, but they all slept in rooms that could have been any one of the thousands of interchangeable, forgotten places scattered across this country. We never think about how easily a room could have the same number as another. How simple it would be for the numbers to lie. How a building could be much larger on the inside than it appears on the outside. How our memories of motels blur together into one terrifying, unsettling composite image. What if I didn't escape that motel? What if I'm still there, in one of the infinite rooms labeled 204, living out every night for the first time over and over? What if every person who listens to this story has stayed in that motel and forgotten about it? What if they've all been in that room, in one of its many manifestations, without even realizing something was terribly, catastrophically wrong? What if the only way out was to pretend you never checked in? I haven't driven cross-country since that night. I don't stay in motels anymore. I drive all night or I pay for a hotel in a major city where the rooms have numbers that make sense. Where the air smells like normal things. Where I'm not the only person on an entire floor. Where I don't have to worry about walking down a hallway lined with identical doors that all claim to be the same room. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that place. I think about that breathing through the wall. I think about that voice that sounded exactly like mine, warning me that I was in someone else's room. And I wonder if it was telling the truth. I wonder if I was never in my own room at all. I wonder if I was in the room of the person who comes after me. The person who would find my hair on the pillow. The person who would hear my breathing through the wall. The person who would hear my voice warning them that they were in my room. And the most unsettling thought of all? That voice I heard didn't sound like my future self. It sounded like my past self. Like something that had already been happening for a very long time. Like a loop that had no beginning and would have no end. The room felt preoccupied. Not by a ghost, not by a memory, but by me. All versions of me that had ever stayed there. All versions that ever would. Trapped in an endless cycle of the same night. The same bed. The same sheets. The same terrible realization that something had gone fundamentally and irreversibly wrong. I am telling you this because I need someone to know. I need the truth out there. And because if you ever stayed in a motel room that felt a little too clean, that smelled a little too faintly of something organic and wrong, that had a bed made with military precision and a shower that gleamed with recent cleaning, then you need to know what you experienced. You experienced the same thing I did, and you need to pray that you managed to escape before the breathing started. Story 5, last broadcast. What happens when you see something you can never unsee? What if I told you that right now, somewhere in this country, someone is watching a television channel that doesn't exist? And what if I told you that channel is watching back? My name is Michael. I am 47 years old. I got a normal job, a normal life, and until 3 weeks ago, I had no reason to believe in anything horrifying or supernatural. But I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know the truth before it happens to them. And it will happen to you. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but if you alone long enough, it will find you. It started on a Tuesday night. I was coming back from a business trip to Denver, driving through the dark American highways that cut through eastern Colorado. 2 lanes, nothing but scrubland and sky. My radio had been dead for the last hour, so I drove in silence, watching the yellow lines disappear under my headlights. The terrifying thing about those roads is how empty they are, how alone you feel, how easy it would be for something bad to happen, and nobody would ever know. I missed my exit, not by much, just 10 miles. When I realized my mistake, I started looking for a place to turn around, but there was nothing. No gas stations, no motels, just darkness and the creeping sense that I'd driven into a part of the world that didn't belong to normal people anymore. That is when I saw it, a motel sign, red neon, flickering in that eerie way that makes your skin crawl. The Sunset Rest. I'd never heard of it, and I would later understand why. The building was old, maybe from the 70s, with a long row of identical doors. The office light was on. Against my better judgment, I pulled in. The manager didn't ask many questions. He just gave me a key and pointed down the row. Room 12. His eyes never met mine. I remember thinking that was unsettling, but I was exhausted, and I needed sleep. The room smelled like bleach and something else I couldn't identify. Stale. Wrong. I didn't bother unpacking. I just lay on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. My eyes kept drifting to the television mounted on the wall across from the bed. It was one of those old models, probably 15 years old, with a thick layer of dust on top. At 11:43, it turned on by itself. I remember the exact time because I was checking my phone, wondering if I should call home, when the screen flickered to life. My heart jumped. I sat up immediately. The remote was on the nightstand beside me, untouched. The power button was not pressed. The television had activated on its own. Then came the static. That horrible, ear-splitting static that belongs to a dead channel. But this wasn't the normal static. It was thick, almost alive, filled with patterns that seemed to move and twist. My eyes couldn't focus on any single thing. The patterns made my head hurt. I reached for the remote and turned the television off immediately. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I sat in that dark room for a long time, just breathing, trying to convince myself that the television had somehow been faulty or on a timer. But I knew better. I knew what I'd seen. And in the back of my mind, a chilling thought was forming. Why would someone turn on a television in an empty room? What if something had turned it on? I tried to sleep, but it kept happening. Every 30 minutes, like clockwork, the television would activate again. Each time, the same static. Each time, I would turn it off. But somewhere around 2 in the morning, something changed. When the television came on, there was a channel displayed. A real channel. Not static, just silence. A perfectly black screen. Empty and waiting, like the eye of something watching me. I should have left. I should have grabbed my keys and driven away from that terrifying place. But I was frozen, paralyzed by something deeper than fear. It was curiosity. A horrifying, dangerous curiosity. I needed to know what that channel was, what it showed, who was broadcasting it. The television stayed on that time. I didn't turn it off. I watched that black screen for 15 minutes, waiting for something to appear. Nothing did, but I felt the presence of it. Something on the other side of the screen. Something aware. Something that knew I was there. Finally, I turned it off and managed to sleep, though my dreams were fragmented and disturbing. In the morning, The room looked ordinary again. Sunlight came through the thin curtains. The television was just a television. I almost convinced myself it had been a nightmare, but when I went to the office to return my key, the manager was different. He looked at me with something like recognition, like he knew exactly what had happened in that room. He didn't say anything, but he handed me a business card. Blank except for a phone number written in faded pen. I threw it away before I left the parking lot. I told myself I would never think about that night again. But that night was when the scary part truly began. For the next week, I was fine. I drove home. I went back to work. I fell into my normal routine, but there was something underneath it all now. A wrongness I couldn't quite identify. The world felt different, thin, like I was seeing it through a layer of glass that might break at any moment. Then, one evening, I came home from work and found my living room television on. I lived alone. The doors were locked. Nobody had a key but me. The television was on a black channel. Waiting, watching. I turned it off so hard I broke the remote. My hands were shaking. That's when I knew this wasn't over. That motel room had changed something. Opened some kind of door. I spent that night researching the Sunset Rest online. There was almost nothing. A few old Yelp reviews from the 90s. All of them mentioned the same thing. Televisions turning on in the middle of the night. People reporting the creepy, unsettling static. One review, posted in 1998, just said, if your TV turns on, don't watch. Don't stay. Don't let it see you watching it. I realized then what was happening. I wasn't going crazy. This was real. And whatever I encountered in that room, it wasn't finished with me. The television incidents escalated. They happened more frequently, multiple times a day, in my bedroom, my kitchen, even in my office at work, when I was completely alone. Each time, that same black channel. Each time, the sensation of being observed, of being examined by something that existed in the space between the broadcast and the viewer. I couldn't turn on a television without fearing what I would find on the other side. But I also couldn't stop checking. That maddening curiosity kept pulling me back. What was on that channel? Was there something I was supposed to see? By the second week, I realized I wasn't the only one this was happening to. I found a forum, hidden deep in the internet, people posting about similar experiences. Televisions turning on, black channels, the terrifying feeling of something trying to communicate. Some people had tried to figure out what was being broadcast. They recorded the black screen on that channel and claimed that if you listened very carefully, you could hear something underneath the silence. A voice, whispering something just beyond human comprehension. One poster had tried to enhance the audio using specialized software. They managed to pull out fragments, pieces of words, a name, maybe a location, and then that person never posted again. Their account was deleted. Their profile was gone like it had been erased. The horror of all this was sinking in deeper and deeper. This wasn't just happening to me. This was something larger, something systematic. A signal that was reaching into homes across America, into the dark, quiet moments when people were most vulnerable, most alone. I started looking at the television differently. Not as an object in my home, but as a portal. A window into somewhere else. Somewhere that existed in the margins of our reality. The place where things that shouldn't exist could reach through and touch us. On the 15th day, something new happened. When the television turned on, the black channel had changed. There was an image, barely visible, almost subliminal, a shape, a figure, standing in darkness, and the figure was looking directly at the camera, directly at me. It knew I was watching. It had always known I was watching. I turned off the television and called that number on the business card I kept hidden away. The number from the motel manager? A voice answered. Not the manager, someone else. Someone whose voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. Or from inside a television. They said only one thing. You've been selected. The broadcast is beginning. Don, to turn it off. The ones who turn it off are the ones who disappear. I hung up immediately. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode. Disappear? What did that mean? I made a decision then. I would do the opposite of what that voice had said. I would turn off every television. I would unplug them all. I would disconnect from the broadcast completely. I went through my entire house that night, unplugging every television, every monitor, every screen. The work felt ritualistic, protective, but also futile, because somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever was broadcasting that signal, it wasn't coming through the televisions themselves. The televisions were just how it manifested. The real broadcast was happening somewhere else. Everywhere, in the electrical signals that ran through our homes, in the invisible networks we couldn't see, in the spaces between channels where lost signals go to die. The most terrifying part came on the 18th day. I received a visitor, a woman, tall and thin, with eyes that looked too empty to belong to a normal person. She didn't say much. She just walked into my home, even though the door was locked, and handed me a folder. Inside was information about me, my full name, my address, my social security number, my mother's maiden name, everything someone would need to become me. And underneath all that information was a photograph. It showed me, but it wasn't the photograph I'd ever seen before. I was standing in a room I didn't recognize, in front of a television, and my eyes were completely black. The woman left without saying a word. I tried to follow her out, but when I reached the door, she had vanished. The hallway was empty. It was like she never existed at all. But the folder remained. The photograph remained. That is when I understood the complete horror of what was happening. They weren't just broadcasting something. They were showing us ourselves, our other selves, the versions of us that existed on that black channel. And they were slowly, carefully, methodically pulling those versions into our world, replacing us, erasing us. I drove back to the Sunset Rest that night. I didn't know why. I just knew I needed to understand the source. The motel was abandoned. The parking lot was cracked with weeds. The neon sign was broken, just dark glass. I went to room 12. It was exactly as I left it. The television was there. I turned it on. This time, when the static appeared, I didn't turn it off. I forced myself to watch. The patterns in the static started to resolve. Forms began to take shape. Faces, hundreds of them, thousands, maybe, all watching me, all identical to people I'd seen before. Family members, friends, coworkers, every single person I'd ever known, looking back at me with eyes that were completely, utterly black. And I realized the terrifying truth. There is no outside of the broadcast. There never was. We were already on the other side. Every television, every screen, every moment we spend watching, we re-showing ourselves to it. And it has been studying us, learning us, preparing to step through. I am telling you this story because I need to warn you. When your television turns on by itself, when you see that black channel, when you feel that presence in the room with you, you need to understand what you actually seeing. You not seeing something watching you from the broadcast. You seeing yourself looking back. And the question ISN, whether it will find you. The question is whether you be brave enough or foolish enough to look back when it does. I am still here, still living in my home. The television stay unplugged, but sometimes I can hear them humming beneath the silence. Waiting. I stop trying to run. There is nowhere to go. The broadcast is everywhere now. It reaches everyone eventually. The real horrifying question is this. When your television turns on by itself in the dark, and you see that black channel filling your screen, will you have the strength to turn it off? Or will you, like me, sit and watch until you finally see what you terrified to see? Your own face looking back at you from the other side. That is the nightmare that follows you now. That is the creeping dread you feel every time you enter a room with a screen. Because now you know the truth, and there's no way back from that. The only question left is whether you answer when the broadcast calls your name. Some of us already have. Some of us are still deciding, but time is running out. They coming through now, one by one, and they all have our faces. Story 6. Check out with no one watching. What if the person checking you out of a place was already dead before you arrived? I am Michael, and I need to tell you what happened at the Blackwood Motel in rural Tennessee. I need to tell someone because the experience has destroyed every assumption I had about reality, about normal human interaction, about what we accept without questioning. It was supposed to be simple. Just one night on the road from Atlanta to Memphis. I was 47 years old, driving alone, handling a divorce the way men in my age group handle most things, by running toward the horizon and hoping the pain gets tired of chasing you. The Blackwood Motel appeared out of the darkness like something that didn't want to be found. The neon sign flickered, casting red and blue shadows across the cracked pavement. The building itself looked like it had been built in the 1960s and abandoned about 10 years later. Paint peeled from the walls in long strips. The windows were dark. Every visible aspect of the place screamed that checking in here was a mistake, a terrifying decision that would haunt me. I checked in anyway. The clerk was a woman in her 60s. She had the hollow look of someone who existed in a place but didn't really inhabit it. Her eyes were the color of dishwater. They moved across my face without ever quite focusing on me. She didn't smile. She didn't speak beyond what was necessary. She simply took my credit card with fingers that felt cold and skeletal, processed the transaction, and handed me a key attached to a plastic diamond with the number 12 on it. Room 12. The hallway smelled like mildew and something else. Something organic and faintly sweet, like flowers that had been dying in the same vase for weeks. The carpet was the color of old blood. My footsteps echoed in a way that made me feel like I was walking through a haunted space, some unsettling place where sound didn't behave normally. Room 12 was at the very end of the hallway. When I opened the door, the air inside was thick and still. No moving air, no sense of ventilation, just dead air that had been waiting in that room for a very long time. The bed was covered with a brown comforter that had a stain I didn't want to examine too closely. The bathroom door hung slightly open, revealing a shower curtain that was partially transparent and deeply unsettling in ways I couldn't articulate. There was a window that faced out onto the parking lot, but the glass had a film on it that made everything outside look distorted and wrong. I told myself it was just a cheap motel. These places always look like this. Forgotten corners of America where people checked in with secrets and checked out with regrets. I tried to sleep, but the eerie silence of the place kept me awake. The creepy atmosphere was suffocating. Something about this room felt off in a way I couldn't explain. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that moved slowly past my door. Then silence. Then, minutes later, they came back and forth, like someone pacing, like someone searching for something. The terrifying part was that the footsteps never stopped at any other door. They only stopped at mine. I held my breath and waited for a knock that never came. The footsteps eventually faded. I forced myself to sleep, and I woke sometime after dawn to find the morning light filtering through the dirty window like something diseased and wrong. Morning came. The sun was already high when I checked my phone. I slept for nearly 12 hours. I had no memory of anything between closing my eyes and opening them again. No dreams, no sense of time passing, just darkness and then light, with nothing in between. That absence of mental continuity was unsettling in itself. I showered quickly, not wanting to spend any more time in that room than necessary. The water ran cold for a long time before it finally heated up. The shower curtain clung to my skin in a way that made my heart race. I dressed fast and packed my bag with urgency. I needed to leave. I carried my bag downstairs to the office. The lobby was empty. Completely, absolutely empty. There was no one behind the desk. No one in the chairs. No sound coming from anywhere in the building except the distant hum of an air conditioning unit that sounded like it was grinding to death. I waited for 5 minutes, then 10, then 15. No one appeared. The terrifying truth began to sink in. I was alone in this building, completely alone, and I had no way to process the checkout without human interaction. The computer on the desk was dark. I didn't know my room number or my confirmation code or anything that would allow me to check out online. The credit card machine was silent and unplugged. There was no bell to ring, no button to push, no way to initiate the normal process of leaving. I could simply leave. I could walk out to my car and drive away. But something about the empty office felt like a trap. Something about the absence of anyone watching felt more dangerous than if someone had been standing right there, staring at me with intensity and purpose. Checkout with no one watching. That's what made it so wrong. That's what made it so scary. I stood at the desk and waited. I don't know what I was waiting for. Some indication that the clerk would return. Some sign that this emptiness was temporary. Some reassurance that I wasn't in serious danger. But nothing came, just that eerie silence that seemed to press against my ears. Then I noticed something that stopped my breath. On the desk, partially hidden under a stack of motel brochures, was a newspaper. The headline read something about a local missing person. A woman in her 60s. Last seen working the night shift at a local motel. The photograph showed a face I recognized. The clerk. The woman who had checked me in last night. Except, according to the article, she had been missing for 2 weeks. 2 weeks before I arrived. 2 weeks before she handed me my key with those cold, skeletal fingers. 2 weeks before she stood at that desk without smiling and processed my credit card with hands that definitely did not belong to someone still among the living. My hands started shaking. I dropped the newspaper and backed away from the desk. That's when I heard the sound. A small sound, a soft sound, the sound of something moving in the office behind the desk. Something brushing against the carpet. I didn't wait to see what it was. I ran for the door, expecting it to be locked, expecting the horrible moment when I would slam against glass and realize I was trapped. But it opened easily. The morning air hit my face, and I could smell asphalt and distant pine trees and freedom. I didn't look back. I walked straight to my car, loaded my bag, and drove. I drove fast. I drove without thinking about where I was going. I drove until I saw a small town, and I stopped at a gas station and used their bathroom to splash water on my face and try to make sense of what had just happened. That is when my phone buzzed with a notification. An email from the motel. The subject line said simply, "Thank you for staying at Blackwood Motel." The email contained a receipt. It showed the room charge. It showed a charge for a second night. A night I had not stayed. A night that had not occurred. But the timestamp on the email showed it had been sent from the motel's computer system, sent automatically at 8:45 in the morning. Right around the time I had been standing at that empty desk, realizing that the woman checking me in had been dead for 2 weeks. I drove faster. I tried to call the motel to contest the charge, but the phone number didn't work. I called the credit card company, but they had no record of a Blackwood Motel on file. The charge on my statement simply said unknown merchant, a charge for a second night at a place that officially didn't exist. The most disturbing part came 3 days later, when I received a letter in the mail. It was addressed to me at my current address, a forwarding address I had moved to only 6 months earlier, an address that I had never given to any motel. The letter was from Blackwood Motel. It was an invoice for the second night, the night I had not stayed. At the bottom of the invoice, someone had written a note in shaky handwriting. "You forgot to say goodbye." I haven't driven through Tennessee since that night. I avoid highways that might pass near the town where that motel is located. I avoid looking at pictures of rural motels online. Every time I check into a hotel, I make absolutely certain someone is watching me check out. I make a point of being observed. I make myself visible and memorable and present, just so that later, when I leave, someone will remember that I was there. Someone will confirm that I existed. Someone will acknowledge that I am leaving. Because the terrifying truth that I come to accept is this. There are places in America where people check in and disappear. Where the normal rules of reality apply. Where the dead still work night shifts and hand out keys and process credit cards with fingers that are ice cold to the touch. And the most horrible part? These places don't imprison you through locked doors or threats or violence. They imprison you through the complete absence of anyone noticing that you leaving. Through the horror of checking out without anyone watching. Through the fear that you might try to leave and find that you were not actually gone. That you were still there, in some version of that room, waiting forever for someone to notice that you were trying to go. The Blackwood Motel still sends me emails sometimes. They arrive at random intervals. They were always from the checkout system, always addressed to me personally, always inviting me back. Sometimes they include photographs of the rooms. Sometimes they include charges for nights I never stayed. And every single one ends the same way. We're still waiting for you to say goodbye. Story 7. Ice Machine. There is a sound I can unhear. It happens around 3 in the morning, every night, whether I'm awake or asleep. That grinding, mechanical screech of ice dropping into a bin. The sound of something breaking. The sound of something dying. And every time I hear it, I am back in that motel hallway in Nevada, standing in the darkness, understanding that I was about to discover something that would shatter my entire life. The scary part isn't what I found. The scary part is how normal everything seemed before I found it. I was driving through the desert on Route 95, heading north toward Reno after a divorce that had stripped everything from me. Money, pride, my belief that life made any kind of sense. I had maybe $300 left in a car with 90,000 miles on it. I was planning to start over. I was also running on fumes, both literally and mentally. The highway stretched endlessly in front of me, mile after mile of nothing but darkness and the distant shapes of mountains I couldn't quite see. By the time I reached the Sagebrush Motor Lodge, I was barely conscious. The terrifying thing about exhaustion is how it creeps up on you. One minute you refine, the next minute you swerving across lanes and you don't even realize it happened. I needed to stop. I needed to sleep, even if it was in my car. But the Sagebrush had rooms available and they were cheap, $40. The woman at the desk, who didn't look up from her phone, didn't seem to care that I had the unsettling appearance of a man who had been living in his vehicle. She handed me a key to room 142 and told me checkout was 11. I paid cash and tried not to think about how many dollars it left me. The room was everything you'd expect from a motel that charged $40 a night. Stained carpet that might have been brown or might have been red. It was hard to tell in the dim light. A bed with a comforter that smelled like other people's nightmares. A television that only got 3 channels. A window that looked out onto the parking lot and the endless desert beyond it. It was the kind of place that horror happens to ordinary people. It was the kind of place where nobody asks questions about the guests who stay there. I collapsed into bed and fell asleep within seconds. I woke up at 3:13 in the morning, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. Not because of a nightmare. I don't remember dreaming anything. I woke up because of the sound. That grinding, mechanical shriek of ice falling. It wasn't coming from the air conditioner. It was coming from outside my room, from somewhere down the hallway. The ice machine. I told myself to go back to sleep. It was just a motel. Motels had ice machines. People got ice in the middle of the night. There was nothing disturbing about it. But something in my chest was telling me differently. Some instinct, some part of my brain that had been hammered by a year of betrayal and abandonment, was screaming that something was wrong. I lay there in the darkness for 15 minutes, listening to the sound of the desert wind pushing against the building. The ice machine made noise again. That same terrifying grinding, that same sense of something breaking down. Then silence. I couldn't go back to sleep. My mind was too sharp now, too aware. So I got out of bed, pulled on my jeans, and decided to investigate. I wasn't thinking clearly. Exhaustion and loneliness do that to you. They make you stupid. They make you walk toward danger instead of away from it. The hallway outside my room was dimly lit by wall sconces that cast more shadow than light. The carpet was the same stained brown-red as in my room. The air smelled like cleaning chemicals mixed with something else, something creepy and organic, like meat left too long in a freezer. The ice machine was down at the end of the hallway, near the stairs, maybe 100 feet away. The distance seemed longer as I walked toward it. The hallway felt like it was getting narrower the farther I went. The shadows between the sconces seemed darker, deeper, like they contained something that was watching me. When I got to the ice machine, I understood why I'd woken up. It wasn't making normal ice machine sounds. There was something wrong with it. The metal casing was dented, like someone had hit it repeatedly with something heavy. The front panel was cracked and hanging open slightly. And the ice bin, visible through the damaged front, wasn't full of ice. It was full of something dark, something that looked wrong in the eerie glow of the hallway lights. I didn't want to look closer. Every part of me was screaming to turn around and go back to my room. But I was so tired of running. I was so tired of ignoring things. So I stepped closer to the ice machine and forced myself to look. The bin was filled with photographs. Dozens of them. Hundreds. All of them face up, frozen in the mechanical ice storage. All of them showing the same thing. They were pictures of people sleeping. People in beds. People in the same motel rooms I was standing near. Taken from above. Taken from very close range. Taken by someone who had been standing directly over their beds while they slept, photographing them without their knowledge. I pulled one of the photographs out and my hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The photo was from room 142. My room. It showed a bed. My bed. And in that bed was a person sleeping. The person looked like me. It looked like me from maybe 5 years ago, before the divorce, when I still had hope in my eyes. That's when I realized something that made the fear so intense I couldn't breathe. The photograph was dated. Written on the back in faded ink was a date from 3 years ago. I wasn't in that room 3 years ago. I'd never been to this motel before tonight. But someone who looked exactly like me had been. I stood there in the darkness of that hallway, holding a photograph that shouldn't exist, feeling the eerie wrongness of the moment settle over me like a shroud. The photographs in the ice machine seemed to shift and multiply when I wasn't looking directly at them. I could feel them watching me, all those sleeping faces, captured in their most vulnerable moments by someone with a terrifying obsession. The scary realization came slowly, then all at once. I pulled out more photographs. Some were dated from years ago. Others were more recent. I recognized faces in a few of them. Other guests, I assumed. Other people who stayed at the Sagebrush. But there were faces that appeared in multiple photographs. The same person in the same bed, photographed over and over again, across years, as if they kept coming back to this place. As if something kept drawing them back. The hallway suddenly felt too small. The shadows felt too dark. The air felt too thin. I shoved the photographs back into the ice bin and turned to run. But I froze. There was a man standing at the end of the hallway, between me and the stairs. He was tall and completely still. His face was in shadow. I couldn't make out his features, but I could see that he was holding something in his hand. A camera. An old camera with a large flash attachment. We stood there, maybe 50 feet apart, neither of us moving. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear the desert wind outside, pressing against the building like something alive trying to get in. I could hear the ice machine behind me, still making those grinding sounds, the mechanical churning of nightmares. The man didn't move. He didn't raise the camera. He just stood there, watching me with an attention so intense it felt like physical pressure. And in that moment, I understood something that the horror of the photographs hadn't made clear. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at something behind me, or through me, like I was transparent, like I wasn't quite real. I turned around and my blood stopped moving through my veins. There were people walking out of the ice machine, or through it. I don't have the terrifying vocabulary to describe what I saw. They were figures made of frost and shadow, translucent and raw. They were dressed in clothes from different eras, pajamas from the 70s, sleeping clothes from the 50s, modern nightgowns, and they were walking toward me with the slow, determined pace of people who had somewhere to be, people who had been waiting a very long time. The terrifying thing is, I recognized some of their faces, not from photographs, from something deeper, from some part of my consciousness that understood what they were before my waking mind could catch up. They were versions of me, different ages, different times in my life, all of them moving with that same eerie purpose, their frost-covered eyes fixed on me as they walked down the hallway toward where I was standing. I ran. I'd never moved that fast in my life. I ran past the figure with the camera, who didn't try to stop me. I didn't look back. I made it down the stairs, through the front office, past the desk where the woman was still looking at her phone like nothing was happening. I made it to my car and I drove. I didn't pack my things. I didn't ask for my money back. I just drove into the desert darkness, pressing down on the accelerator until the speedometer hit 90 miles an hour. In the rearview mirror, I saw figures walking out of the motel, walking toward the parking lot, walking with that same terrible purpose. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I drove until I reached the outskirts of Reno, and then I kept driving. I'd never been back to Nevada. I'd never gotten close to that highway again. I sold the car 2 months later and bought a different one, used a different name when I could, tried to erase any trace of that night. The scary thing is, I'm not sure if I succeeded. Because sometimes, when I'm falling asleep, I hear that sound. That grinding, mechanical screech of the ice machine. And I wonder if it's still making that noise in Nevada. If the ice bin is still full of photographs. If the man with the camera is still standing in that hallway, waiting for someone to discover his collection. And I wonder about the versions of me that I saw, the ones walking out of that machine made of frost and shadow. I wonder if they were memories, if they were possible futures, if they were me, walking through time, all the different variations of myself, converging in that one unsettling place. Last month, I had a dream that I never left that motel. That I turned around instead of running. That I stood in that hallway and let those frost-covered versions of myself reach me. And when they touched me, I felt my consciousness start to scatter. I felt myself splitting into multiple people, all existing at once, all experiencing the same moment from different perspectives. I felt the terrifying realization that I was no longer singular, that I did become many. When I woke up, I was ice cold. Even though my apartment was warm, even though it was summer, I was shaking so badly I couldn't stand up. And that sound was echoing in my head. That grinding, mechanical screech. The sound of ice falling in the dead of night. The chilling truth is this, I don't know if I actually escaped that motel. I don't know if the version of me that drove away in that car was the original me or just another variation. Another iteration of the same haunted soul. I don't know how many versions of myself are still there, walking those hallways, being photographed while we sleep, becoming part of something larger and more horrifying than any individual person could comprehend. And the most disturbing thought of all is that there are other people like me. Other people who stayed at the sagebrush. Other people who heard that sound and woken up at 3 in the morning. Other people who discovered the ice machine and the photographs. Other people they've seen the man with the camera and the figures made of frost. But they'd never met another survivor. They'd never encountered anyone who made it out, which makes me wonder if the only one who actually escaped, or if I never left at all. Story 8. Headlights. I should have trusted my gut the moment I saw the motel sign flickering in the darkness. But when you have been driving through the Nevada desert for 11 straight hours, any promise of a bed starts looking like salvation. The Starlight Motor Lodge sat alone on a stretch of highway so empty it felt like the world had simply ended a few miles back. No gas stations, no diners, just sand, scrub brush, and that horrifying sense that I had driven too far into nowhere. The room smelled like cigarettes and something underneath I could not quite name. Something stale and wrong. I dropped my bag on the bed and pulled back the curtain to check the parking lot. My truck sat under a buzzing yellow light, the only vehicle in sight. The office had been dark when I checked in. An old man with sunken eyes slid my key across the counter without a word, took my cash, and disappeared into a back room before I could ask about checkout time. That should have been my first warning, but exhaustion makes you ignore things. It makes you settle into creepy motel rooms in the middle of nowhere and tell yourself everything is fine. I was asleep within minutes. Deep, heavy sleep that pulls you down like drowning. Then the headlights woke me. Bright white beams swept across my wall, cutting through the thin curtains and painting shadows that moved like living things. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, a car pulling into the lot. Finally, another guest. I rolled over, pulling the pillow over my head, waiting for the engine to cut off, waiting for a car door to slam, waiting for footsteps. But the engine never stopped. The headlights stayed on, bright and steady, pointed directly at my window. I lay there in the darkness, listening. The low rumble of an idling engine vibrated through the walls. Minutes passed, 5, 10. My heart started beating faster. Why would someone just sit there? Were they lost? Broken down? I sat up slowly and moved to the window, staying to the side, peeking through a gap in the curtain. The car sat 20 feet away. An old sedan, dark colored, maybe blue or black. Hard to tell in the dim light. The headlights blazed into my room like searchlights. I could not see through the windshield. The glare was too bright. But I knew someone was inside, sitting there, watching. I stepped back from the window, pulse hammering in my throat. This was not normal. This was not someone checking their phone or looking at a map. This felt deliberate. This felt wrong. After another minute, I heard the tires crunch again. The car moved, slowly, circling the parking lot. The headlights swept past my window, across the office, over the empty spaces, and then back around. It moved in a lazy, predatory loop. And it never parked. It never stopped. My mouth went dry. I grabbed my phone. No signal. Of course there was no signal out here. I was miles from anything resembling civilization. The nearest town was 40 minutes back down the highway. I thought about getting dressed, getting in my truck, and leaving. But something about that circling car made me hesitate. Something about the way it moved. Patient. Waiting. The headlights passed my window again. I counted. It took exactly 90 seconds to complete one full loop of the lot. Then it started again. I backed away from the window and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to think. Maybe it was just someone messing around. Some local kids being creepy for fun. But the longer I sat there, the more that explanation felt wrong. This was not playful. This was not a prank. This felt like a hunter circling wounded prey. The car passed again, and again. The same slow, steady loop. The same bright headlights. The same low rumble of the engine that never cut off. I lost track of how many times it circled. 10, 20, time started feeling strange, stretched out and distorted. My room felt smaller. The walls seemed to press in. The air tasted like copper and fear. Then the car stopped. The engine kept running, but the movement ceased. The headlights stayed fixed on my window. I could not breathe, could not move. I just stared at that rectangle of light bleeding through the curtains and felt my skin crawl with the certainty that someone was staring back at me. Someone in that car, watching, waiting for something. I do not know how long we stayed like that. Me frozen in the darkness, them sitting in that idling car. But eventually, the car started moving again. Same slow circle, same haunting pattern. And that is when I realized something horrifying. I had not seen another car on the highway for hours before I arrived. This road was dead, empty. So where had this car come from? Had it followed me? Had it been waiting here the whole time? I forced myself to move. I grabbed my keys and my phone and pulled on my jeans. I had to get out. I did not care anymore. I would drive through the night. I would push through the exhaustion. Anything was better than staying in this room with that thing circling outside. But when I reached for the door handle, I froze. The curtain was open, just a crack, just enough to see out. I had not opened it. My blood turned to ice. Someone had been inside my room while I was asleep. Before the car arrived, they had opened the curtain. They had wanted me to see. The headlights swept past again. In that brief flash of light, I saw something that made my stomach drop. There were scratches on the inside of my door. Long, deep gouges in the wood, like someone had tried to claw their way out, or like someone had been scratching while they waited, watching me sleep. I stumbled backward, hitting the bed. My mind raced through terrible possibilities. The old man at the desk, the empty parking lot, the car that never stopped. This was not random. This was planned. This was a trap. I heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate footsteps on gravel, moving around the building, coming closer. The car kept circling. But now someone was outside my door. I could see a shadow underneath, a dark shape blocking the light from outside. The doorknob turned, slowly, testing. I had locked it. I knew I had locked it, but the knob kept turning. Metal scraped against metal. Someone was working the lock, taking their time. No hurry. I looked around frantically for anything to use as a weapon. Nothing. The room was stripped bare. No lamp, no chair, just a bed and a dresser bolted to the wall. The scratching at the lock continued. Patient, methodical. They knew I was in here. They knew I was listening, and they wanted me to know they were coming in. The headlights passed again. The car made another loop. The footsteps stayed at my door, and I understood with chilling clarity what was happening. They were tag teaming, one circling to keep me focused on the window, one at the door, working the lock. Unsettling coordination, like they had done this before. The lock clicked. The doorknob stopped turning. Everything went silent. The car stopped circling. The engine idled in place. The footsteps outside went quiet. Even the desert wind died down. The whole world held its breath. And then my phone buzzed. One sharp vibration in the suffocating silence. I looked down. A text message from an unknown number. Room 4 is unlocked now. My room was number 7. I stared at the message, trying to understand. Room 4. Not my room. They were not coming for me. Not yet. They were going somewhere else. Someone else. The car suddenly lurched forward, tires spitting gravel. It sped across the parking lot and stopped in front of room 4. The headlights blazed against that door. And I heard it. A scream. Muffled. Distant. Coming from inside room 4. A scream that cut off too quickly. I ran to my window and looked out. The door to room 4 stood open. The interior was dark. The car sat there, headlights burning. And a figure walked out of that room. Calm. Unhurried. Dragging something heavy behind them. They loaded it into the trunk of the sedan. Then they looked up, directly at my window. I could not see their face. Just a silhouette. But I felt their gaze. Cold. Empty. Calculating. They got back in the car and started driving again. Same slow circle. Same terrifying pattern. And I understood. They were not done. This place was not a motel. It was a hunting ground. The old man at the desk. The empty lot. The rooms scattered around the property. All of it was designed for this. To isolate. To trap. To pick off travelers one by one. And I was next. The car passed my window again. But this time, it slowed down. The engine revved slightly. A warning. A promise. They would come back. I did not wait. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the door. I threw it open and ran for my truck. The cold desert air hit my face. The car was on the far side of the lot. I had seconds. Maybe less. I jumped in my truck and turned the key. The engine sputtered. Died. I tried again. Nothing. My hands shook. The car was turning, coming back around. Headlights swinging toward me. The engine caught. I threw it in reverse and punched the gas. Tires screamed. I whipped around and aimed for the highway. The sedan accelerated behind me, closing the distance fast. I hit the road doing 60 and kept climbing. 70, 80. The headlights stayed locked on my bumper. Mile after mile through the black Nevada desert. No other cars. No lights. Just me and the thing behind me that would not stop. I drove for an hour. Maybe more. The headlights never fell back. Never gained. Just stayed there. Constant. Horrifying. A reminder that whatever this was, it was not over. Then I saw lights ahead. A town. Small but real. I nearly cried with relief. I roared down the main street and pulled into a gas station lit up like a beacon. There were people. A clerk inside. Safety. I stumbled out of my truck, gasping. I turned to look back at the road. The sedan was gone. Vanished. Like it had never been there. But on my windshield, tucked under the wiper, was a piece of paper. I pulled it out with trembling hands. It was a receipt from the Starlight Motor Lodge for room 7. Checked in yesterday. Checked out this morning, but I had arrived tonight. I had just left an hour ago. I flipped the receipt over. On the back, written in faded ink, were 4 words that made my blood freeze. See you next time. I never drove that highway again. But sometimes, late at night when I am alone, I see headlights in my rearview mirror. Circling, waiting, following me home. Story 9. Knocking from the other side of the wall. 3 months ago, I stopped sleeping like a normal person. Not because I wanted to, because something in my apartment made it impossible. And I'm telling you this story now because I think it is still here, and I think it is hunting. I think it has always been hunting, and I think you need to know what to listen for. My name is Robert. I am 47 years old. I work in data entry for a medical supply company. I have a Honda Accord with 130,000 miles on it. I pay my taxes. I watch the news. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in a normal American suburb called Riverside, outside of Denver. Nothing special. Nothing that should have attracted anything dark or sinister or terrifying to my life. But that is exactly the kind of person these things target. We're invisible. We're forgettable. We're the ones nobody asks questions about. It started on a Tuesday. I was in bed around 11 at night. The television was on. Some late night show that I wasn't really watching, just using it as background noise to fill the silence. The silence in apartments like mine is oppressive. It's the kind of silence that makes you aware of every small sound, every pipe creak, every settling of the building, every distant sound of neighbors moving around in their own little boxes of space. That is when I heard it, knocking from the other side of the wall. Not loud, not urgent, just a soft, deliberate series of taps. Tap, 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 the kind of knocking that is patient. The kind that says I have all the time in the world, and I'm not going anywhere until you acknowledge me. I thought it was my neighbor, Mark, 23 years old, works nights at a warehouse. Sometimes he'd knock if he needed to borrow something or if his music was too loud and he was checking if he complained. I got up and opened my door. The hallway was empty. The knocking came again, but this time it was coming from inside my apartment. From the bedroom wall. The wall that faces the outside of the building. The wall that, if you looked at the layout of the complex, has nothing but empty space on the other side. Just the exterior wall of the building. I went back into my bedroom. The knocking stopped. I thought maybe it was pipes. Old buildings have pipes. They expand and contract. They make noises, especially at night when the temperature drops. This was a creepy, unsettling explanation, but it was the kind of explanation that let me get back into bed and try to sleep. I was almost asleep when it started again. This time it wasn't at random. There was a pattern. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 3 taps again. Like Morse code, like someone was trying to communicate. My heart was racing. I was fully awake now. Every nerve in my body was alert. I got out of bed and pressed my ear against the wall. The wall was cold, colder than it should have been in a heated apartment. The knocking stopped the moment my ear touched it. I stood there in the darkness, my ear against that freezing wall, waiting. Nothing, just silence, but the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like something was on the other side, waiting for me to move, listening to me listening to it. I backed away slowly. The next night, it happened again. And the night after that. Always around 11. Always the same pattern. 3 taps, 2 taps, 3 taps. Like a question asked in a language I didn't. Do you understand? Like something was trying to teach me a terrifying, horrifying code that I was supposed to decipher. I told Mark about it. He said his apartment was fine. No knocking. No weird sounds. He thought I was joking. When I insisted I wasn't, he got uncomfortable and changed the subject. People do like to hear about other people's nightmares. It makes them nervous. I tried to ignore it. I really did. I put in earplugs. I turned up the television. I slept with music playing. Nothing worked. The knocking would always find me. It would always penetrate whatever barrier I created. It was like the knocking wasn't coming through the wall at all, but directly into my brain. A week went by. Then 2 weeks. The knocking became more frequent. It started appearing in the afternoon. It moved from the bedroom wall to the living room wall. It began happening at different times, no longer confined to 11 at night. I'd be eating lunch and I'd hear it. 3 taps, 2 taps, 3 taps, always the same rhythm, always patient, always waiting. I started researching. I found articles about sounds in walls. Mice, squirrels, raccoons. The explanation was always some kind of animal. But the knocking wasn't. The frantic, chaotic sound of an animal. It was deliberate, intelligent, purposeful. That is when the fear really set in. I started investigating the apartment. I looked in the crawl space above the closet. Nothing. I checked the basement storage area. Empty except for old boxes from previous tenants. I examined every inch of the exterior walls, looking for cracks, holes, any kind of entry point. Nothing. But the knocking continued, day and night. 3 taps, 2 taps, 3 taps. I didn't sleep for 48 hours once. Just sat on my couch with all the lights on, waiting. Watching the wall. During that time, the knocking happened at least a dozen times. Always unpredictable, always patient, always the same pattern. I started to understand that the knocking wasn't the scary part. The scary part was that it was trying to get my attention. The scary part was that whatever was on the other side of that wall wanted me to know it was there. And the terrifying part was that I had no idea what it wanted. I called the landlord. His name was Frank. He came over with a skeptical expression and a toolbox. He listened for about 5 minutes and said he didn't hear anything. But then, while he was still in the apartment, the knocking started again. Loud enough that we both froze. Frank's face went pale. He said he'd have an inspector come out. But his voice was different now. It had lost its confidence. He heard something he couldn't explain, and it had changed how he thought about the building. The inspector came 3 days later. He was a chilling, efficient man who checked everything. He looked at the walls with infrared imaging. He listened with some kind of advanced stethoscope. He examined the insulation and the pipes and the foundation. He found nothing. But while he was there, the knocking happened. Clear as day. 3 taps, 2 taps, 3 taps. His hands trembled slightly as he marked something on his clipboard. He told me it might be settling. He didn't sound convinced. And neither was I after that. Frank stopped returning my calls. I was alone with the knocking. I started to go crazy. Not gradually. Quickly. I was losing sleep. I was losing weight. I was calling out of work. I was sitting in my apartment with all the lights on, waiting for the next knock. Dreading the next knock. Needing the next knock because at least then I know something was still real. That is when the neighbor on the other side started to figure it out. I first noticed something was wrong when I came home one evening and found a note slipped under my door. It was from a woman named Sarah who lived in the unit to the left of mine. She asked if I had been knocking on the wall. She said it had been keeping her awake. My first thought was that maybe the knocking was coming from her side. Maybe I'd been wrong about the direction. Maybe it was coming through both walls, and the sound was just confusing. I went to talk to her. She opened the door with sleep-deprived eyes and a look of desperate hope that I might have an explanation. I asked her to describe the knocking. She described it exactly. 3 taps, 2 taps, 3 taps, the same pattern, the same rhythm, the same eerie, unsettling timing, except she said it was coming from her wall that faced my apartment. We stood in her apartment, silent, both of us understanding something we didn't want to understand. The knocking wasn't coming through the wall from the outside. It was coming from somewhere in the middle, somewhere in the space between our 2 apartments, somewhere that didn't exist on any blueprint of the building. Sarah said she already moved. She was just staying one more night to collect some things. She was moving in with her sister across town. When I asked her why, she didn't answer. She just looked at the wall with a kind of horror that matched exactly what I was feeling. After she left, I went back to my apartment. The knocking had stopped, completely. For the first time in nearly a month, the wall was silent. But the silence wasn't a relief. The silence was worse, because now I knew that whatever was in the space between the walls knew that I knew about it. It knew that Sarah had figured it out too, and it had stopped knocking because it didn't need to get our attention anymore. We already knew it was there. 3 days of silence. 3 days of the most terrible, anxiety-filled quiet I ever experienced. I barely ate. I barely moved. I just sat and waited for the knocking to resume. It did resume, but not from the wall anymore. The knocking came from inside the apartment, from the closet, from the cabinet under the sink, from the space behind the refrigerator. It was as if whatever was out there had realized that the walls weren't working, so now I was on the inside. Getting closer, getting more intimate with my space. 3 taps, 2 taps, 3 taps, endlessly, patiently, hunting. I finally broke down and called a priest. I know how that sounds. I know how crazy it sounds. But I was desperate and terrified, and the fear was consuming every rational part of my mind. The priest I called was from a Catholic church nearby. His name was Father Michael. I didn't tell him much on the phone. Just that something was wrong in my apartment and I needed help. He came the next morning. Father Michael was an old man, maybe 70. He had kind eyes, but they looked tired, like he'd seen things in this world that had worn him down. I told him everything, about the knocking, about Sarah, about the pattern, about how it had moved from the walls to the inside of the apartment. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly and asked if he could walk around the apartment. We went from room to room. He didn't say much. He just observed. He looked at the walls. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the floor. When we got to the bedroom, the knocking started. It was urgent now, fast, no longer the patient 323 pattern. Just constant, frantic pounding. On the wall, inside the wall, behind the drywall, like something was trying to break through. Father Michael put his hand up to the wall and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he looked older. He looked scared, and for the first time, I understood that whatever was on the other side of that wall was something even a priest couldn't handle. He told me to leave, not to pack, not to call anyone, just to get in my car and drive. He said he would call someone to help, but I needed to get out of the apartment immediately. I did what he said. I drove for 3 hours. I stayed in a motel outside of Wyoming. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't try to sleep. I just sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the silence, waiting for the knocking to find me even here, in this terrible, lonely motel room. The knocking didn't come that night, or the next night, or the night after that. On the 4th day, I got a call from Frank, the landlord. His voice was different, formal, like he was reading from a script. He told me that the apartment had experienced structural damage that required immediate evacuation and demolition, that the entire unit and the units adjacent had to be condemned. I asked him what they found. There was a long silence. He said they found nothing. The walls were solid. No animals, no pipes, no explanation for the knocking. But the building had decided the structural integrity was compromised, and the units were being demolished. I asked about Sarah. He said he didn't. Do you know who I was talking about? I described her. He said no one had lived in the unit next to mine for 3 years. The apartment had been sealed off after the previous tenants moved out suddenly. The building had never rented it again. For some reason, people always reported strange problems with the units on either side of it. My hands went numb. I drove back to Riverside. I wanted to see for myself. When I got to the complex, my entire apartment building was surrounded by a fence. Demolition permits were posted on the gate. Construction equipment sat idle in the parking lot. The building wasn't there anymore. It had been demolished. The entire structure had been torn down and removed. The foundation had been filled in. There was nothing left but concrete and dirt and the memory of something terrifying. I still don't. Do you know what it was? I don't. Do you know what lived in the space between the walls? I don't. Do you know if it was trying to communicate or trying to reach through to our side? I don't. Do you know if Sarah was real or if my mind had invented her? Sometimes I convinced myself she was real. Other times I'm not sure. What I do know is this. 3 weeks ago, I moved into a new apartment. A different complex, different part of the city. Completely new building. I felt safe. I felt like I escaped whatever that thing was. Last Tuesday, around 11 at night, I heard it, knocking from the other side of the wall. Not loud, not urgent, just enough to make sleep impossible. The same pattern. 3 taps, 2 taps, 3 taps. It found me. I don't. Do you know how it found me? I don't. Do you know if it traveled with me in my car? If it was somehow connected to me? If I carry it with me wherever I go? But it is here, and it is patient. And every night at 11, I hear it, and my heart stops. And I remember that sound in that other apartment, and I understand that some things don't to let you go. Some things follow you. Some things knock, and knock, and knock, and they never stop knocking. And the terrifying, unsettling, horrifying truth is that one day, you might actually open the door to see who is on the other side. And once you open that door, once you look into the darkness and see what it's been knocking all this time, you can never close it again. The knocking continued even now as I am telling you this story. It is coming from the kitchen wall. It is always closer to where I am. It is always finding me. It is always patiently, methodically, relentlessly reminding me that it is there. And I think the real nightmare is this. I think the knocking isn't trying to get in. I think it is trying to get out. Story 10. Motel Hiso LDN. To find again. Have you ever been somewhere that shouldn't exist? Have you ever realized too late that you crossed a line you couldn't cross back over? I am about to tell you something that will change how you see the empty places in America. The forgotten stretches of highway. The motels that shouldn't be there. The roads where people vanish. My name is David. I am 52 years old. And I made a mistake that I've been trying to forget for the last 8 months. But I can forget. Nobody can forget something like this. So I am telling you now, before the fear consumes me completely, because maybe you understand what happened to me. Maybe you all know not to make the same choice. It was October. I was driving through Nevada, heading toward Las Vegas for a work conference. I'd taken this drive 100 times before. Same highway, same desert stretching forever in both directions. But this time, something felt different. The sky was wrong. Not dark, but thick somehow. Heavy, like something was pressing down from above. I was tired, exhausted. Really, I'd been driving for 14 hours straight. My eyes were burning. The highway was hypnotic, and my attention kept drifting. I saw mile markers disappear, saw the same desert landscape repeat in my peripheral vision. And that's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There was a building where there had never been a building before. A motel, just sitting there in the middle of absolutely nowhere. No exit sign had announced it. No billboard had advertised it for miles. It was just there, appearing suddenly like it had always been there, and I just never noticed it before. The structure was old, the kind of 70s architecture that you don't see anymore. 2 stories, a faded brown color, and a sign that read, Desert Winds Motel, with half the letters burned out. The unsettling thing wasn't that it was there. The terrifying thing was that it looked empty, completely abandoned. No cars in the parking lot, no lights in any of the windows, just a hollow, eerie shell sitting in the desert darkness like a tomb. But there was a light on in the office. I should have driven past. I should have kept my foot on the gas and left that chilling place far behind me. Something in my gut was screaming at me to keep going, but I was so tired. My vision was getting blurry. My hands were numb on the wheel, and that office light was like a beacon, a promise of safety, of rest. I took the exit that shouldn't have been there. The gravel parking lot crunched under my tires. The sound was wrong somehow. Too loud, too sharp. It made me think of bones breaking. I parked directly in front of the office and just sat there for a moment, my hands still gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself that this was a normal thing. That motels existed in the middle of deserts. That this wasn't some kind of horrible mistake. The office door opened before I could knock. A man stood there. He was thin, with skin that looked like it had never seen sunlight. His eyes were gray, completely gray, with no distinction between iris and white. When he looked at me, I felt like something inside my chest had gone wrong. Like my heart had skipped more than one beat. He didn't ask my name. He didn't ask how long I was staying. He just handed me a key attached to a wooden block with the number 7 carved into it. His hands were cold. I could feel the chill of them even though we barely touched. I wanted to leave. Every single instinct in my body was screaming at me to walk away. But I took the key. I took it and I drove around the side of the building to find room 7. The room was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned desert motel. The carpet was stained. The walls smelled like cigarette smoke and something else I couldn't identify. Something like copper and decay. The furniture looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. But the bed was made. The sheets were clean, and there was a thermostat on the wall showing that the room was being heated. Someone was maintaining this place. Someone was keeping it ready. I locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my jacket, still holding my keys. The curtains were drawn tight against the night outside. I could hear wind moving across the desert, a sound like something breathing. I tried to convince myself I was just exhausted, that my mind was playing tricks on me because I hadn't slept in almost 24 hours. But then I heard it, a sound coming from inside the walls. Not a creak, not settling wood. It sounded like something moving, something large, something moving slowly through the structure of the building itself. The sound would start in one place, move across the wall, then disappear into the darkness. It would return in a different location, getting closer, getting closer. I turned on every light in the room. I wanted to leave, but looking outside the window filled me with a horror that was hard to describe. The darkness out there wasn't natural. It was thick and writhing. It was the kind of darkness that felt alive. That felt like it was waiting. So I stayed. I sat on that bed, fully clothed, and I waited for morning. The night was long. The sound in the walls never stopped. Sometimes it sounded like scratching. Sometimes it sounded like something heavy being dragged. And underneath all of that, I could hear something else. A chanting maybe, or a whisper repeated over and over. Words I couldn't quite make out, but they seemed to be getting louder. Somewhere around 3 a.m, I heard the other guests. Footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Heavy footsteps. Multiple people, it sounded like, moving back and forth, room to room. But when I looked through the peephole in the door, the hallway was empty. The footsteps continued anyway, pacing, stopping, then moving again. The sound of doors opening and closing. But no one was there. That is when I realized the most chilling part of the mystery. There were no other cars in the parking lot. I checked. When I gotten the key, I driven around the entire complex. I was completely alone in this motel. Completely alone, except for whoever or whatever was making those sounds. I didn't sleep. I sat in that room for 8 hours, listening to the terrifying noises, feeling like something was pressing down on me. Like I was being observed. Like I made a mistake that couldn't be undone. When gray light finally started creeping around the edges of the curtains, I gathered my things and got out of that room as fast as I could. I didn't return the key. I just threw it on the office counter and walked out. The drive away from the Desert Winds Motel felt like an escape. I pushed my car to 90 miles an hour, not daring to slow down, not daring to look in my rearview mirror. The desert landscape rolled past, mile after mile, hour after hour, and finally, I arrived in Las Vegas and tried to pretend the whole thing had been some kind of fever dream. But I couldn't let it go. After the conference, when I was back home in California, I started researching. I looked up the Desert Winds Motel online. I searched for it on Google Maps. I checked the Nevada Hotel Registry, and I found absolutely nothing. No business record, no address, no evidence that it had ever existed. So I called the Nevada Highway Patrol. I gave them my location on the highway. I asked them if there was a motel in that area. The officer on the phone went silent for a long time. Then he told me something that made my blood turn cold. He said that the location I described was in the middle of state land. That there had never been a motel there. That the last building of any kind in that area had been torn down in 1984. I drove back. I know that sounds insane. But I had to know. I had to prove to myself that the motel was real. That I hadn't imagined it. So 3 months later, I retraced my route. I drove the exact same highway. I looked for the exit. I looked for the gravel parking lot. And I found only empty desert and a stretch of road that looked like every other stretch of road. The motel was gone. But here is where the horror becomes something different. Something worse. Something that makes me question whether I actually escaped that place at all. A week after my second drive, I started finding things. A key with the number 7 on it, sitting on my kitchen counter. I live alone. Nobody else has my house keys. The door was locked. The windows were locked, but the key was there. Then I started getting phone calls. No voice on the other end. Just breathing. And underneath the breathing, that same chanting sound I heard in the walls of the motel. The sound of something whispering words I still couldn't quite understand. The most chilling part came 2 months ago. I received a letter. It was addressed to me, but there was no return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed me, but it wasn't the photograph I recognized. I was standing in the parking lot of the Desert Winds Motel. But I was wearing clothes that I never owned. And my eyes looked wrong. They looked gray, completely gray, like the eyes of the man who had given me the key. I haven't slept properly in 8 months. I can't stay in motels anymore without experiencing a panic attack. I can't drive through the desert without feeling like something is tracking me. And I started noticing something disturbing. Other people have made the same mistake I made. They found online forum posts from people describing the exact same motel. The exact same experience. The exact same empty desert location that they can never find again. The same chanting sounds. The same footsteps in the hallway. The same gray-eyed man at the desk. And we all have something in common now. We all have that key. We all get those phone calls. We all feel like we're being watched. We all look slightly different in photographs than we remember looking. Our eyes are getting grayer. The most terrifying realization is this. I don't think I ever actually left that motel. I think I'm still there. All of us who stayed in that place are still there. We're all in our rooms, sitting on those stained beds, listening to the sounds in the walls. The memories of driving away, arriving in Las Vegas, going back to our normal lives, they feel real to us. But they might just be something the motel is letting us think. Something it's showing us to keep us calm. The address led nowhere. Only an empty stretch of road remained when I tried to find it again. And I understand now why. The motel wasn't on that road in 1984. It won't be there tomorrow. It exists in the spaces between where it should be. It exists for people like me who make the terrible mistake of being too tired, too desperate, too alone at exactly the right moment. And it keeps us. It always keeps us. The key on my nightstand keeps moving closer to my hand every night. The phone calls are getting louder. The chanting is starting to form words. Real words. Words that sound almost like my name. And I am beginning to understand that soon I want to have to drive anywhere to go back. The motel will come to me. The nightmare ISN that it's out there waiting. The nightmare is that some of us never really left. Some of us are still there, sitting in that darkness, hearing those footsteps, knowing that we're not alone. And the worst part is knowing that one day you might find that same motel. You might be tired enough to stop, and you might never leave either. Motels like these don't announce themselves. They just linger in your memory. Midnight Whispers Stories isn't a collection of random videos. It's an ongoing experience. When you subscribe, you lock in access to new long-form stories, the same atmosphere, and a series that continues without reset. Subscribe and stay with the stories.